late hairstyle. What do you mean? Big cheeky woman. Capital FM.
Ouch! That's real skin, man. Real flash. Let me come
Some melodies have the ability to take me back to a time in my life that lives in my memory, but those feelings and recollections have been there for so long now that it's hard to know if they're memories or the works of imagination cast from the mind in an attempt to feel a fleeting moment for just one more time. The Commodore Amiga is 40. Many will recall their time with the Amiga in the 80s, but as I was only 6 in 89, that's before my time. Instead, I wanted to really dive headlong into my decade with the Amiga, the 90s. I don't know the first time I saw an Amiga, probably 1990. I couldn't even tell you if on that occasion I knew it was an Amiga, but I'm fairly certain that I know what I saw glowing through the 1084 monitor's aperture. Rainbow Islands. Taito's coin-up smash follow-up to Bubble Bobble was a huge game in the UK where I am from, cheerful and packed full of gameplay. It was hard to imagine a more colourful video game. Everything about it seemed to fit with what I loved. Cute character design, rainbows and lots of platforming. Colour and warmth is what radiated from it, not least when I also got a chance to play Buggy Boy, another bright and vivid arcade-like game. Bounce along underneath the gates to score points, driving up on one wheel, it felt like such a trip. Both of these are games I will play from time to time on the Amiga. They may not be the best versions of these games, but they hold up. One thing that would hold up is Lemmings. It was a game of Christmas of 1991. Everyone wanted it. I never even played it, and yet at a school brick and brack event with a friend we made an entire Lemmings activity pack full of badly drawn lemmings that you could colour in dot to dot and other nonsense that we copied with the school photocopier. We could always twist as school receptionists aren't to let us use it, you see. I guess there's truth to those rose-tinted glasses. How else can it be explained that my early Amiga memories seem to sit handily alongside the hangover of the 1980s? Lurid rad colours of hot pinks and lime greens, fashion that seemed to burst with colour, that gradually gave way to the early 1990s baggy trend. I remember my skateboard from the time, a massive kicktail but with hot pink wheels, nose and tail guards and some wacky kind of patination on the bottom. I tie all of this with the music that I'd hear at the time, Snap, Felix, The Shaman and so many more, all whilst looking out of my late uncle's Vauxhall Cavalier as he travelled down London's Western Avenue in the summer of 1992. I can place that pretty specifically because I was on my way to my cousin's house for a few days and we watched quite a bit of the Barcelona Olympics on TV. But I also played on their Commodore Amiga 500 with whole boxes full of copied discs and the names of games that now escape me, but having a great time in between all of that going out, skating and generally causing mischief. That laid the foundation for my years with the Amiga. When I finally obtained my own after a lot of hard work, including lying about my age to get a paper round, in late 1993 I got my Amiga 600 Lemmings pack. All it had was Lemmings and Dulux Paint Free, and I was in love. Not just because I could sit there and get the say tool to utter rude words and other such nonsense. In time I discovered a world of Amiga games that thankfully still hold up today. Lotus 2, The Settlers, Rodland, Arkanoid and so many others, and Dulux Paint was just amazing, drawing in what seemed like full colour with a mouse no less. Compared to my Commodore 64, huffing floppy disks seemed state-of-the-art, even though they weren't. Over time I would come to understand that the Amiga was more of a personal computer that was mostly competent for playing games on, occasionally amazing. I know that some Amiga diehards will flinch at that, but that was my opinion at the time and it has only strengthened over the years. Put simply, I came to enjoy gaming on my Super Nintendo way more, but that was a dedicated games console, whereas the Amiga could play a decent game of Lotus 2, Rainbow Islands and Cannon Fodder, as well as do word processing, printing, sophisticated pixel art and animation, desktop publishing, coding and so much more. But by this time, if truth be told, Commodore's Amiga was already beginning to slip behind. It was decent, but IBM PCs were beginning to outshine it with ease, though in time an upgraded Amiga could still shine. Maybe it was pride, as no one bought my Amiga for me. I bought it for myself through that hard work doing my paper rounds. And so I guess I got a little bit defensive at times when kids would mock my Amiga and boast how good their PC was. Except of course, it was the family's PC, and there was no way an 11-year-old bought themselves a PC in 1993. So I guess whilst I could take the joshing, it seemed a little unnecessary, because I always wondered, what are you trying to prove? But even though I recall those slight ructions, it was all between friends. These memories are tied up with the experience of us pretending to be drunk on soft drinks, mocktails at school discos, dancing away to La Bouche and Hadaway, berating mates justifiably for eating salt and vinegar sandwiches on summer camps, and that one time at Minehead's Butlins, where after fun in the awesome water park, suddenly I realised that I had a pocket full of money and could buy my friends each a can of cherry coke or whatever they wanted. I was now in my early teens and bringing in a small but steady income. I stuck with the Amiga because I was using it as a computer by this time, not as a games machine. By this time I kinda stopped gaming on my Amiga. That had moved over onto the Super Nintendo and later the PlayStation. It was more affordable for me to gradually upgrade it than it was to save up big money for a PC. At first, a little bit of extra memory, then a second disk drive, then a hard drive, followed by a faster processor and yet more memory, and then a CD-ROM drive with a nice proper monitor and so on. By doing so, I came to genuinely discover what it was the Amiga had as a computer. But this was well into the Windows 95 era, making many of the Amiga's strengths a little bit of a moot point. But back in the day, a lot of this capability was overlooked when it was in its prime. Through this, I gradually came to understand how Amiga OS really worked and what potential it really had when you gave it the resources it deserved. In truth, yes, it could work every bit as well as a Windows 95 PC, though as software crashed, it had a tendency to bring the whole system down. Even though the software was a lot better than it had ever been on the Amiga, it was never going to go up against the giants from Aldus, Adobe, Corel, Quark and Microsoft, though for a home user like myself it was more than enough, and some applications like Scala for multimedia presentations were for a long time unrivaled, and WordWorth and PageStream were really good for word processing and desktop publishing in the home. By the late 90s, the Amiga was very much a dying thing for diehards. Each year I'd visit the World of Amiga show, with my last visit being the World of Amiga in 1999 at the Kensington Town Hall with my dad. It was a very hot summer's day as we walked from the rough and ready NCP car park under the Hammersmith flyover, still high with anticipation, but I didn't go with any purchases in mind. Instead, it was just for a few widgets and gadgets. By then it was clear to me that I was coaxing my Amiga 1200 along for as long as it would go on for, but it remained a great place for me to pick up some accessories and software for it. I remember even pausing over an Amiga 1000 Workbench 1.1 disc set and nearly bought them for all of £3, if only for posterity, but I never did. Perhaps the moment that capped off all of this patience with the platform was when in the year 2000 I took an Amiga 3000 into college to demonstrate my finished A-level computing project, a programmable email client that allowed you to add email functionality to any application. I used an application called CanDo to build an interface for the partially sighted that could be displayed on a standard TV. Behind the scenes, it talked with my AREX-driven email application. AREX was a programming language that lended itself to writing macros for applications that supported it, and you could communicate and share data between any of these applications. For me, that was the culmination of steady patience, gradually upgrading my Amiga through my own means, and learning just what it was capable of is what made my time with it so special. It was an innovative little bit of software that I never released, and had I done so, for the time at least, you could have added email functionality to just about any Amiga application with an AREX interface. But just as Snap had given way to Grace, Ultranate and then Chicane, I was growing up too. Lemmings and Rainbow Islands discs gathered dust. Instead, that's what the PlayStation was for. Playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater religiously was what 1999 and 2000 was all about for me, and Crash Team racing with friends into the early hours hammered on cheap alcohol was a lot of fun. It was about that time I began to sneak into nightclubs and pubs underage, all aided with a fake ID that I handily made on my Amiga with TV paint from a repurposed library card. My life had moved on considerably by this time. My hopes of becoming a freelance writer began to fade as I had my very brief debut in Amiga Format dashed by it ending up being their final issue. But at least I got to meet editor Ben Vost, former editor Nick Veach, and others like Alan Redhouse of iTech. I freely admit though that I got really rather drunk that day in March 2000. As looking back at the magazine, I'm not sure my timeline and some of my answers is actually quite right. Whether that was due to the drink or me trying to appear a bit older than I actually was, as I was 16 at the time, I remarked that I had been reading Amiga Format since the late 80s. This can't be true, as I know the first time I saw the magazine was at my cousin's, and as I would sneak upstairs sometimes to read them. That was much more likely to be the early 90s, as I remember reading about the then new Amiga 500 Plus's problems. Nonetheless, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I continued freelancing. Maybe I would have transferred to other future publications, but I doubt it. I remember looking out of the window at the train at Bar Station as it pulled away, putting my headphones on to listen to Lost Witness, feeling that the day was like the culmination of all that steady patience of sticking with the platform, and I had thoroughly enjoyed myself. In a very minor way, I had the chance to share some of my knowledge on the Amiga with the readers. But Amiga Format was closing, the 90s were over, an era was ending.
The Commodore Amiga 500 now comes with the exciting Batman package, or Class of the 90s, the fun way to learn. Is he doing his homework or playing the Joker?
I never found out why he chose me to share his secret. Perhaps because we had similar dreams. But this was twice as fast. Twice as powerful as anything I'd ever thought possible. Though what that meant, I could never have foreseen. Incredible graphics and colors, so many colors. Our world would never be the same again.
But what of the Amiga games that I enjoyed? Well, here's a small showcase of some of those that I had a great time with, many of which I've mentioned already, but here goes. Rainbow Islands was the first game I mentioned as being a big part of the Amiga for me in the 90s. As arcade ports go for the platform, this one is very much a diamond in the rough. It's a shame it lacks the secret islands, but if you like classic arcade style platforming, this is a contender for the best on the Amiga. The Secret of Monkey Island. Both the first and second games were staples on the Amiga, showing where its personal computer form had some benefits, with storage space for lush backgrounds and smooth mouse control. Sure, the Super Nintendo did get a mouse accessory, but it's surprising how little it was supported, though in Japan the Super Famicom fared a little bit better. Hilarious adventure gaming at its best. Pang is another great port of the Mitchell arcade. Developed by Ocean France, they were at the top of the pack when it came to producing quality arcade ports, simple in concept and a little tricky to get the hang of on your first couple of plays, but it's addictive and gave me a taste of the Japanese aesthetics on my Amiga. Lotus 2, I just wish that this had in-game music, then it would be a nigh-on arcade-perfect arcade racing experience on the Amiga. This is a smooth, fast-playing checkpoint racer that I played to death back in the day. This is the quality Amiga arcade-style games often lacked compared to their console peers. The Settlers. As before, the Amiga's personal computer form comes up to the fore here, also available for the PC. This strategy game sees you setting up a kingdom, exploiting its resources to expand your domain and taking on neighbouring enemies. Deep and rich in gameplay that had me hooked for hours, days and weeks on end. Populous 2. Much like the Settlers, this so-called God game was a welcome follow-up to the original, and I prefer this version. Build an empire by getting people to follow you and wreak havoc on the non-believers and get them to convert to following you. Mouse-driven games on the Amiga seem to fare well. Lemmings. Not much needs to be said of this. Assign tasks to the aimlessly wandering lemmings and guide the required amount or more of the hapless critters to safety. The green-haired, blue-clothed critters were everywhere in the early 90s, and the original Amiga version remains the best. Pinball Fantasies was when pinball simulation leveled up a notch with a more realistic ball physics engine, though I personally found the tables a little bit so-so if I'm honest. I didn't think that so much at the time as I enjoyed playing this game, but having played other pinball games such as Q-Tenkai on the PlayStation and Alien Crush on the PC Engine since were a lot more fun to me. But this was a huge franchise on the Amiga, no doubts there. Cannon Fodder courted notoriety in the UK for its use of the poppy emblem, which is worn for Remembrance Sunday here. It was in fact a game that took a cynical look at the pointlessness of war by sending troops off into the meat grinder. But it was great fun, smooth Amiga scrolling and again awesome mouse control made this one hell of an addictive game. The Chaos Engine is my last pick. Run and guns on Amiga tended to be pretty hit and miss, especially arcade ports, but this one was a hit. Tough but enjoyable. I vastly prefer the original version of this game's metallic palette rather than the more colourful later AGA release, but it plays great on an Amiga 1200 with a little bit less slowdown on a basic A500 class machine.
Node activated.
In late 2000, my Amiga 1200 eventually died, and that was the end of the road for me and the Amiga as my main computer platform. I bought a second-hand PC from a chap in Crackerton Haven who sold old office PCs, and I was very happy with it in fact. But I guess my decade of using and owning Amigas was never really going to disappear out of my life, and it's why to this day I still have a huge affection for the platform. These days, that affection is very much still there, and though it's buried in storage since I moved and since returned from living in Japan, I still have my childhood Amiga 600 that I bought all those years ago. In some ways it's great that I have returned to my roots a few years ago, getting back into gaming, drawing and skateboarding, because for me, that time growing up in the 90s was so special. But I'm even more stoked to be making a new decade of memories with all of these things that I hold dear, here and now, and the Amiga is in its small way a part of it.